The Earth's atmosphere was choked with the weight of its impending doom. Once a cradle of life, the planet had become a scared, dying relic of what humanity once held dear. Decades of war, overconsumption, and ecological collapse had pushed the Earth's ecosystems to the brink of collapse. Cities crumbled, oceans boiled, and breathable air was a rare commodity. The world was at a breaking point, with global governments offering no solutions and hope running out. But in the face of destruction, humanity's ingenuity refused to die. A plan was conceived, a last-ditch effort to save the human race, the last horizon. Captain Elara Stone, a seasoned veteran of Earth's military, had seen the worst the world had to offer. She had led countless operations, faced insurmountable odds, and lost too many comrades to count. But none of that had prepared her for the mission ahead. Leading the first wave of humanity's pioneers to the stars was a challenge that felt like both a burden and a fragile thread of hope. The fleet, a collection of massive ships built from the remnants of Earth's last technologies, was meant to carry the surviving population to a distant, habitable world beyond the stars. The mission was unprecedented. The stakes could not have been higher. Elara stood at the command bridge of the Orion, the flagship of the fleet, her fingers gently brushing over the ship's control panel. The rumble of the engines beneath her feet reminded her that the ship was more than just a vessel, it was humanity's last chance. The hundreds of ships following in formation would either carry the human race to a new beginning or plunge them into the unknown void of space with no hope of survival. The countdown clock on the screen ticked down to 0. Elara's breath caught in her throat as the order to launch was given. This was it, the moment that would define humanity's fate. But just as the Orion and its sister ships began their ascent, a sudden surge of static filled the communication channels, and alarms blared across the bridge. The deep, ominous hum of the asteroid storm resonated through the ship's hull. From the navigational screens, Elara could see a massive field of debris racing toward them, too close, too fast. The storm had formed out of nowhere, an unpredictable calamity born of the chaos that had been escalating on Earth's surface. "Captain, the storm is coming in faster than predicted," shouted her chief engineer, Lieutenant Raylan, his face ashen with fear. "If we don't divert course, we'll be torn apart." "Hold steady," Elara barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "All hands to their stations. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The storm was merciless. Hundreds of asteroid-sized rocks, some the size of small cities, spun through space like bullets. They were on a direct collision course with the fleet. A single impact would mean the end for the Orion and every ship in its wake. The crew scrambled, desperately working to adjust the ship's course and prepare for impact. Elara's hands flew over the control panel, her mind racing as she tried to find a way to dodge the storm's wrath. A strike could cripple the ship, but losing even one vessel would cripple their entire mission. In that moment, a harsh, rattling jolt shook the Orion. One of the smaller ships, the Vanguard, had been struck. Its engines exploded in a brilliant flash, sending a shockwave through the fleet. The ship's trajectory veered off course, breaking away from the others. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. The first casualty of humanity's exodus was already here. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. "We can't afford to lose anyone." Her mind raced with calculations. Every second counted. They needed to adjust their trajectory, but any misstep could spell doom. She ordered all available thrusters to be activated at full power. It was a gamble, one that could push the Orion to the brink of destruction, but there was no other choice. A tense silence followed as the crew held their breath. Then, with a deafening roar, the Orion broke free from the asteroid storm's grasp. The fleet, though battered, had survived its first test. "We made it," Rylan muttered, disbelief in his voice. "We actually made it." But Elara knew better than to celebrate just yet. The storm was only the beginning. Out there, beyond the safety of Earth's atmosphere, lay the true unknown, the uncharted galaxies, hostile alien races, and the ever-present specter of failure. For humanity to survive, they had to press forward. There was no turning back now. As the fleet hurtled deeper into the void, the vast expanse of space spread out before them, an endless sea of stars and darkness. The Orion and its companions coasted through the nothingness, their engines barely a whisper against the crushing silence of the cosmos. The asteroid storm had been a reminder of just how fragile their mission was, but now, with Earth slowly disappearing behind them, the pioneers faced a new terror: isolation. They were alone, with no communication from home, no way to turn back. It would be months before they could even make contact with their distant planet again. In the silence of space, every decision, every mistake, would now echo across eternity. Elara Stone stood at the command deck, staring at the viewports, her face bathed in the soft glow of distant stars. Despite the grim circumstances, there was something breathtaking about the sight. But as the captain, she couldn't afford to be distracted by beauty. She had to stay focused. "We've entered the outer rim of the nebula vortex," reported Lieutenant Raylan, his voice tight with the pressure. "It's larger than we thought. I'll be adjusting the course to avoid the densest areas, but this is uncharted territory." Elara nodded, her brow furrowing. The nebula vortex wasn't just any cluster of gas and dust. It was a region of space so dense with electromagnetic interference that even the most advanced navigation systems struggled to function. Without accurate readings, their fleet could easily become disoriented or lost. To make matters worse, the nebula was also home to strange gravitational anomalies that could pull their ships off course or into deadly collisions with invisible objects. "Keep it steady, Rylan," she said. "We're not turning back, no matter what happens." Her words were meant to be comforting, but even she could feel the tension. The fleet had survived the asteroid storm, but space itself now seemed intent on testing their will to survive. Hours passed as the fleet navigated deeper into the nebula, the faint starlight distorted by the swirling clouds of dust and gas outside. The crew worked tirelessly, adjusting course and performing repairs on the fly, but the tension only grew with each passing minute. No one dared to speak, as if the quiet might somehow make the danger feel less real. Then, just as the mood seemed to reach its breaking point, an anomaly appeared on the radar. A massive object, something not of their own fleet, drifting silently through the nebula. The object was enormous, far larger than any ship the pioneers had ever seen, and it appeared to be completely derelict, its systems offline and its surface scarred by years of neglect. "What in the hell is that?" Rylan asked, his voice tinged with awe and fear. "It's not on any of our scans. It wasn't here a minute ago." Elara squinted at the monitors, studying the unfamiliar craft. There was something unsettling about its design, sleek, almost alien, with sharp angles and smooth surfaces that seemed to shimmer despite its dilapidated state. The object didn't match any known human or alien technology. It was like a ghost drifting in the void. "We need to investigate," Elara decided, her voice firm. "This could be the key to understanding what lies beyond our galaxy. Prepare a boarding party." The tension on the bridge shifted from one of fear to cautious curiosity. This strange vessel might hold vital answers, or it could be a trap. Elara could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the decision heavy on her mind. The fleet's mission was to find a new home, but they hadn't counted on encountering alien artifacts or technology this early. She had no idea whether this discovery would be a blessing or a curse. As the Orion slowly approached the mysterious vessel, a sudden spike in energy readings shot across the sensors. It was a signal, faint but unmistakable, coming from deep within the ship. Someone, or something, was alive on board. "Prepare for boarding," Elara ordered, gripping the armrest of her command chair, "and be ready for anything." The unknown beckoned, and Captain Elara Stone had no choice but to answer. The Orion came to a slow, deliberate stop in front of the derelict vessel, its hull flickering faintly as the crew prepared to board. The strange ship seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, its silhouette barely visible in the nebula's dense fog. Ilara stood at the head of the boarding party, her expression hard and unreadable. Her team, armed and ready, filed out behind her. The silent hum of the airlock ceiling behind them was the only sound in the darkened corridor. They were about to step into the unknown, where anything could lie in wait. "Ready, Captain," Lieutenant Raylan said over their comms, his voice steady but taut with anticipation. "We've confirmed that there's power aboard, but life support is barely functioning." Ilara nodded, her gaze scanning the darkened corridors ahead. The silence on this ship was unlike anything she had experienced. Even in the dead of space, there was always a hum of activity or a whisper of movement. But here, there was nothing. No hum of the engines, no flicker of lights, only the oppressive stillness of a long-forgotten place. "Stay sharp, everyone. We don't know what we're dealing with here," Ilara instructed, her voice low but commanding. "Move out." The boarding party moved cautiously through the ship's dimly lit hallways, their boots echoing on the metal floor. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that Ilara couldn't recognize. They seemed to pulse faintly, almost as though they were alive. At first glance, the ship looked like it had been abandoned for centuries, but the odd, glowing symbols and faint hum of power suggested otherwise. This ship had been here for far longer than it should have been, and yet it was somehow still functional, its systems barely hanging on. As they ventured deeper into the ship, the team encountered strange, humanoid-shaped figures frozen in place, their bodies preserved in what appeared to be some sort of stasis pods. They were all in various states of disrepair, their features faded, but their presence was undeniable. "What happened to them?" Rylan whispered, his voice barely audible as he inspected one of the pods. "I don't know," Ilara replied, her eyes narrowing, "but it looks like they were frozen in time." One of the figures stirred, its eyes flickering open. The crew jumped back in surprise, weapons raised. But the figure didn't move aggressively. It simply looked at them with an almost haunted expression, its gaze empty and cold. "We're not alone," one of the soldiers muttered under his breath. Ilara stepped forward cautiously, raising a hand to signal for the team to lower their weapons. She approached the figure carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the first sign of life they'd encountered on the ship, and the possibilities of what it could mean sent a chill through her spine. Was this a survivor, an alien, or something more sinister? The figure's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Its eyes shifted towards Ilara, and it blinked slowly, as though gathering its strength. "Who are you?" the figure rasped, its voice barely audible but heavy with centuries of disuse. "We're human," Ilara answered, her voice steady but cautious. "We've come to learn what happened here." "What is this place?" The figure's gaze turned distant, its expression hollow with what Ilara could only describe as sorrow. "We were the last of our kind," it whispered, the words heavy with a deep, lingering grief. "We built this ship to escape, but there was no escape. The war, the cataclysm, it consumed us all." Ilara's brow furrowed. What war? What happened here? The figure closed its eyes as if recalling the painful memories, a tear tracing down its worn face. "We were part of a civilization that spanned the stars until we awakened something terrible, something that should never have been awakened. The Voidbringer. It destroyed everything, and now it is coming for you." A shiver ran down Ilara's spine. The words were almost too much to comprehend. The Voidbringer. She had heard rumors of such a thing in ancient texts, but it was always considered myth, a warning to be forgotten in the sands of time. Yet here, before her, was the chilling confirmation that the stories had been true. The destruction of an entire species, of a whole civilization, by a force too vast, too powerful to understand. Ilara steadied herself. What is the Voidbringer, and how do we stop it? The figure's eyes flickered with a strange, almost regretful light. You can't stop it, it whispered. But you can survive if you leave. Leave now before it finds you. It's already watching. The clock is ticking. Ilara's mind raced as the weight of the figure's words sank in. They had come for hope for a future. But instead, they had stumbled upon the remnants of a lost, doomed civilization, and a force far darker than they could have ever imagined. And worse yet, the Voidbringer was coming. We have to go, Ilara ordered, her voice filled with urgency. Now, the team moved quickly, retreating from the ship, their minds spinning with the terrifying revelations. They had come looking for answers, but the truth they had uncovered was far more chilling than they could have ever prepared for. The journey to a new world was no longer just about survival. It was about escaping a force that could devour them all. As the airlock closed behind them, Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. The stars ahead seemed less like a destination now, and more like an inescapable abyss. The Orion and its fleet had resumed their journey, but the weight of the discovery lingered like a dark cloud. The crew moved with a heightened sense of urgency, their eyes darting to the horizon of space as if the vast emptiness could somehow offer them solace. The truth was undeniable now. They weren't just trying to find a new home. They were running. Captain Ilara Stone sat alone in the command chair, her eyes locked on the fleet's trajectory as it cut through the nebula. The stars ahead shimmered in the distance, beautiful yet indifferent. Every system hummed quietly around her, but the silence was deafening. The haunting words of the figure on the derelict ship played on repeat in her mind. The Voidbringer is coming for you. Ilara exhaled slowly, trying to calm the gnawing panic that threatened to consume her. The Voidbringer, whatever it was, had destroyed an entire civilization, and now it was tracking them. She couldn't shake the feeling that the catastrophe wasn't just inevitable. It was already underway. They had become part of its hunt. Captain, Ryland's voice crackled over the comms, pulling her from her thoughts. We're approaching a point of no return. The trajectory we're on will bring us too close to the edge of an unstable star system. I recommend we adjust course immediately before we're pulled in. Ilara's hand hovered over the controls, but before she could respond, the ship's systems flickered, lights dimming momentarily as if the ship itself were hesitating. It was then she realized that this wasn't just a technical glitch. Something was interfering with their systems. What the hell? She muttered under her breath. Ryland's voice came again, more urgent this time. Captain, we've lost control of the navigation. The star system is pulling us in faster than we can compensate. A deep, throbbing hum filled the bridge as the Orion veered off course, helpless against the gravitational pull of the unstable system. Alarms blared, and the ship's hull groaned under the strain of the force. Ilara's grip tightened on the console as she fought to regain control. Something wasn't right. They shouldn't be losing control like this. Captain, the anomaly, it's everywhere. It's not just the star system, Ryland reported, his voice shaking. It's like the entire space around us is warping. Our sensors, they're being flooded with energy readings. We're being dragged into something we can't understand. A cold shiver ran down Ilara's spine. The Voidbringer. It had already started. The ship was being pulled into a phenomenon far beyond their comprehension, and she could sense it now, a presence vast and incomprehensible, brushing against the very fabric of reality itself. It wasn't just a force of destruction, it was something that could bend space and time to its will. We're losing the fleet. One of the officers shouted as the entire bridge shook violently. The Orion was spiraling, the gravitational forces growing stronger with every passing second. The ship's crew scrambled to stay in control, but the relentless force of the anomaly seemed to mock their every attempt. All hands, brace for impact, Ilara shouted, slamming her fist down on the emergency command. We have to break free now. But it was too late. The Orion was being dragged into a black vortex, a swirling maelstrom of energy that seemed to open up in the heart of the unstable system. In an instant, everything outside the ship was consumed by darkness. Stars, planets, and the nebula vanished into an impenetrable void. The familiar sounds of the ship's systems were drowned out by a deafening roar, and the entire fleet was lost within the event horizon of the vortex. Alara felt the ship lurch violently as the Orion plunged into the unknown. It felt as though time itself had ceased to exist. The stars outside had disappeared, replaced by an eerie blackness, and the feeling of being utterly, hopelessly alone crept over her like a suffocating shroud. "Captain." Ryland's voice broke through the chaos, panicked. We're inside. The gravitational anomalies. They're warping the very fabric of space. We don't know where we are anymore." Alara struggled to steady herself, gripping the edge of her seat. The crew was disoriented, trapped in a place that shouldn't exist. They had entered something far darker than they had anticipated, a dimension where the laws of physics no longer applied. She couldn't even begin to comprehend what they were up against now. The comms crackled again, but it wasn't Ryland's voice this time. It was a distortion, a low, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the ship. The words were almost imperceptible, but Alara could feel their presence. Something was trying to communicate with them. Something ancient and malevolent. In that moment, Alara realized the truth of what the figure had said. The Voidbringer was not just a destroyer. It was a force, a parasite of the universe, something that fed on reality itself, and they had walked right into its grasp. The ship's systems flickered again, and the eerie voice continued, now clearer, resonating in her mind. "You are mine." The cold, alien words echoed in her skull, and she knew, without a doubt, that they were no longer in control of their fate. "Prepare for the worst," Alara whispered, gripping the arms of her seat. "This is only the beginning." The ship's hull groaned, vibrating under the pressure of the strange forces surrounding it. Alara gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. The eerie voice, "You are mine," repeated in her mind like a cold, creeping whisper. It was as though the very fabric of space was alive, tightening around them, suffocating them with its presence. The Orion was adrift in a place where time and space were no longer defined, trapped in a cosmic prison of unknown origin. The stars outside had vanished, swallowed by the immense void, and the ship's system seemed to be dying with every passing second. "Captain," Lieutenant Ryland's voice cut off, replaced by a high-pitched, distortion-filled static. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She turned to face Ryland, but he was frozen, his hand still gripping the control panel, eyes wide in terror. It was as if something had paralyzed him, his body unable to move. "Ryland!" Alara snapped, moving toward him, but the crew member was unresponsive. The air was thick with tension, the very atmosphere of the ship crackling with energy. "Captain, we can't." The voice from the comms distorted again, louder this time, as though something was fighting to break through. The distortions cleared, but the words that followed chilled Alara to the bone. "This is your final warning. Leave now, or you will never leave at all." The comms fell silent, but the air was thick with an oppressive sense of doom. Alara's mind raced. What was this thing, this force, that could command space itself? They had entered a dimension far beyond their understanding, and the very laws of reality were unraveling before their eyes. They weren't just trapped in space, they were ensnared in an alien nightmare. "Ryland, respond?" Alara demanded, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. She had to maintain control. If the crew saw her falter, they might fall into panic. The comms crackled again. This time, Ryland's voice came through, but it was faint, as if coming from a great distance. "Captain, I see it," he gasped, his voice shaking. I see everything." Alara's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about, Ryland?" He didn't respond immediately, his breath ragged, before finally continuing. "It's like like I can see through everything. Time, space, it's all connected, and it's unraveling. The Void Bringer. It's not just here, it's everywhere. It is the void. It was born from nothing. It devours all of reality. And we're the next piece. Elara's mind reeled. The Void Bringer, an entity that wasn't simply a destroyer, but a force of pure cosmic consumption. It didn't just destroy. It erased, leaving nothing in its wake. And they had stumbled into its domain. Rilin, listen to me, Elara said, trying to focus him. I need you to stay with me. Can you do that? There was a long pause before Rylan's voice returned, softer now, barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can. Rylan, focus. Elara's command was sharper, more desperate. We're not dead yet. We can still fight. We can? A violent lurch shook the ship, cutting off her words. The force was unlike anything they had experienced before, far worse than any gravitational anomaly. Elara's body slammed into the console, pain lancing through her chest. The crew scrambled to hold on, the lights flickering and alarms blaring as the ship was battered from all sides. It felt as if the very ship were being torn apart, the walls groaning, the metal screeching in protest. Then, suddenly, a deep rumbling noise filled the air, vibrating through the ship's core. It was as though the entire universe had taken a breath, and then exhaled a roar so deafening it shook the ship to its foundation. Elara's mind snapped into focus. The Voidbringer was awakening. We're not alone, she muttered, her eyes scanning the monitors for any sign of the enemy. The feeling of being hunted was palpable, an ancient predator closing in. The Orion was at the mercy of a force so ancient, so incomprehensible, that all her training and experience meant nothing in the face of it. The ship's alarms went off again, but this time, they weren't warnings of mechanical failure. They were signals of something far worse. The gravitational anomalies intensified, twisting the ship's trajectory further off course. Captain, the ship's systems, they're failing completely. Rylan's voice came through, frantic, weary. Before he could finish, the entire bridge was plunged into darkness. The ship's power was being drained, and the faint emergency lights flickered like dying embers. Stay calm, Elara said, her voice quieter now, but with a newfound resolve. We've been through worse. We'll find a way to fight back. But as she spoke, she felt a presence in the air, a weight pressing down on them. The Orion wasn't just trapped in a strange place, it was being watched. A soft hum filled the air, barely noticeable, like a whisper between dimensions. Elara's eyes narrowed, trying to track its source. The sound came from everywhere, vibrating through her bones. It was alive. Before she could act, a voice, deep and resonant, filled her mind, a telepathic whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. You cannot escape me. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, Elara thought she saw something moving in the shadows of the bridge. Something vast and incomprehensible, a shape that seemed to bend reality itself. She knew, in that instant, that their true fight had just begun. The Voidbringer had found them. The Orion was sinking deeper into the void. Every moment spent within the reach of the anomaly felt like an eternity. The ship creaked and groaned as though it were being pulled apart, the walls bending under the weight of a force that defied understanding. The hum in the air grew louder, now joined by an unsettling, almost rhythmic pulse, as if the ship were beating in sync with the heart of something much larger. Elara gripped the control panel tightly, her knuckles aching, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from the monitors. The readouts were chaotic, the sensors overloaded with data that was entirely nonsensical. The stars outside the viewport had long since vanished, leaving nothing but endless blackness, a darkness that seemed to draw them further in with every passing second. Captain, Rylan's voice came through the comms, but it sounded distant, strained. We're losing contact with the fleet. The distortion is too much. They're gone. I think they're trapped in it too. Elara's heart sank. The fleet had been their last hope, their safety net in case something went wrong. And now they, too, were caught in the same nightmare. They were alone, utterly alone. "We need to get out of here," Elara said, her voice firm despite the growing fear inside her. "We're not losing anyone else. Prepare for a manual jump. If we can get to the edge of this anomaly, we might still have a chance." But as she spoke, the ship lurched again, this time harder than before, throwing her and the crew to the floor. The emergency lights flashed wildly, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. It was as though the entire ship was shaking in the grip of something beyond their control. "Captain," Rylan cried, struggling to stand. Something is coming." Elara struggled to her feet, heart racing. "What do you mean, something is coming?" Before he could answer, the comms were flooded with static. A low, pulsing hum filled the bridge, drowning out everything else. It wasn't just the ship's systems. This sound, this presence, was coming from somewhere outside, from the very heart of the anomaly. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and Elara's breath became visible in the air. It was as if the very atmosphere had changed, had shifted. The reality around them seemed to warp, the space stretching and compressing like a living thing. Her eyes darted to the viewport. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw a movement in the darkness beyond, a shadow impossibly large, something that shouldn't exist. And then the voice came again. "You cannot escape." It was everywhere, filling her mind, sending a chill down her spine. It wasn't speaking in words. It was more like a presence that filled the space between thoughts, burrowing deep into the subconscious. "We have to get out," Elara shouted, her hands flying over the control panel. She input the coordinates for the manual jump, but the system failed to respond. The ship was no longer under their control. The high-pitched sound, like 1,000 voices wailing in unison, cut through the air. The ship's hull shuddered violently, as if it were being torn apart at the molecular level. Elara staggered, fighting to stay upright, but the force was overwhelming. She felt as though the very structure of the Orion was unraveling. The distortion outside the ship became more intense, the void outside swirling with unnatural energy. Elara's mind raced. They were trapped in the very heart of it, in the heart of the Voidbringer's domain. She had no idea how they could fight something that could distort reality itself. But then, as if answering her unspoken thoughts, a new voice filled her mind. This one wasn't the Voidbringer's. It was a voice that carried strength and power, a voice that seemed familiar in its resonance. "Elara, you must listen." The voice was not human, but it was close enough, clear, strong, and commanding. Elara froze, her pulse quickening. She could feel it in her bones, the presence of something other, something ancient. It wasn't malevolent like the Voidbringer, but neither was it benevolent. It was simply there, watching, waiting. "You are at the edge of existence. To leave, you must align with the energy of the void. You cannot fight it. You must become part of it." Elara's thoughts swirled. Become part of it? What did that mean? How could they align with something that was destroying everything around them? But then the truth hit her like a lightning bolt. They were already part of it. The Orion had entered the anomaly, and by doing so, they had crossed the threshold into the domain of the Voidbringer. "We cannot survive alone in this place," the voice continued. "You must embrace the change, or you will cease to exist." Elara fought the panic rising in her chest. "What do you mean, embrace it?" she demanded. "How do we get out of here?" There was no answer, just the eerie hum of the ship's failing systems and the oppressive weight of the void pressing in from all sides. The voice seemed to be fading, leaving Elara with more questions than answers. "Captain," Rylan shouted, his voice desperate. "We're not alone. Something's here. Something. Alive." Elara turned to see him standing near the viewport, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. Outside the ship, the darkness had shifted again, revealing something massive, something that seemed to pulse with the same energy that now coursed through the Orion. A shadow, an entity, vast and incomprehensible, loomed in the blackness. The Voidbringer. Elara gritted her teeth. They were in its domain now, its power swirling around them like a storm. But there was no turning back. They had come too far. "Prepare yourselves," she said, her voice a low growl. "This is where we make our stand." The blackness outside the Orion was no longer just emptiness, it was alive. As the ship shuddered and groaned under the crushing force of the anomaly, Elara could feel the presence of the Voidbringer drawing closer, like a predator stalking its prey. The shadow outside the viewport seemed to pulse, a grotesque, undulating form that defied the laws of physics. It was vast, an entity far beyond anything human comprehension could grasp. "Captain, we need to do something now." Ryland's voice came through the comms, tight with fear. "This thing, it's coming for us. We can't outrun it." Elara's hands flew over the control panel, but the ship's systems were in complete disarray. The navigation was dead, and the engines were sputtering, barely able to keep the ship stable in the face of the gravitational anomalies. They were floating in the eye of a cosmic storm, and every moment spent within the anomaly felt like an eternity. "Rylan," Elara said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her, "we can't outrun it. But maybe we don't need to. We've been thrown into its domain, yes, but we have one thing it doesn't understand, us. We have to fight, no matter the odds." Ryland's silence was heavy. Then, through the tension, he muttered, "What are we supposed to do, Captain? We're outmatched, outclassed. This thing is beyond us." Elara turned to him, her expression hard. "We fight by surviving. We adapt, we learn. Humanity has always found a way through the impossible, and we will do it again. Whatever this Voidbringer is, it's not invincible." Before Ryland could respond, the ship lurched again, this time violently. The Orion was thrown off course, its hull screaming in protest as a force from the outside shoved them further into the heart of the anomaly. Elara stumbled, grabbing onto the console for support. The emergency lights flickered once more, casting long shadows across the bridge. On the view screen, the vastness of the darkness was now punctuated by flashes of light, fleeting glimpses of something moving at impossible speeds. It wasn't just the Voidbringer. It was its minions, shapes of raw energy shifting and contorting as they raced toward them. "We're being hunted," Elara whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They're coming for us, and they won't stop until we're gone." The bridge fell into a tense silence. The crew's faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear, but Elara couldn't afford to show any sign of weakness. The Voidbringer had already claimed so much, but it had not claimed them yet. She wasn't about to let that happen. "Rylan," she said sharply, snapping him out of his stupor. "Can you get any of the weapon systems online? If we can't outrun them, we'll make them regret coming after us." Ryland's fingers flew over the control panel, his face drawn in concentration. "I'm trying, Captain, but the systems are barely responding. We're being jammed by the anomaly. It's interfering with every damn signal." The hum of the ship's failing systems mixed with the distorted whispers from the comms. The eerie voice of the Voidbringer echoed again, its words slithering through Elara's mind. "You cannot defy me." The cold, commanding presence of the entity loomed over them, more suffocating with each passing moment. Elara felt it pressing against her consciousness, trying to break her resolve, but she refused to let it. "Rylan, I need you to focus," she barked. "Give me something, anything." He glanced up, his eyes wide with desperation. "I can't. Wait a second." His hands froze over the panel, and then he looked at Elara, his voice trembling. "Captain, I think I found a way to counteract its interference." "Do it," Elara commanded without hesitation. "We don't have time to waste." Rylan worked feverishly, his hands flying across the controls. The ship trembled once more as the energy around them seemed to intensify. For a moment, Elara thought they would be torn apart right then and there, but then, against all odds, there was a sudden shift. The lights in the bridge flickered back on, and a low hum filled the room. "We're back online," Relin exclaimed, a note of disbelief in his voice. "The weapon systems are operational. We can fight back." Alara nodded sharply, her eyes narrowing. The threat was still there, looming just outside the ship, but they had a chance now. They weren't helpless. "Target the energy surges around the anomaly," she ordered. "That's where the Voidbringer's power is concentrated. We can destabilize the gravitational field long enough to break free. But we'll need all our firepower. Everyone, brace for impact." Rillan activated the ship's weapons, and the bridge was suddenly filled with the deafening roar of energy cannons charging up. Ilara felt a rush of adrenaline as the ship began to hum with power. For the first time in what felt like forever, they were fighting back. On the view screen, the Voidbringer's shadow pulsed again, closer now, its tendrils reaching out toward them. Alara gritted her teeth. It was coming. The final confrontation was at hand. "Ready," she muttered. "Let's make them regret ever finding us." With a deafening explosion of energy, the Orion fired, sending a volley of powerful blasts toward the anomaly. The ship lurched again, but this time it wasn't from the gravitational pull. It was the first strike in their counteroffensive, a strike against the darkness that had nearly consumed them. But the Voidbringer wasn't finished. Its response was immediate, and its power was overwhelming. "You cannot escape." The battle had only just begun. The Orion shuddered as the energy blasts collided with the anomaly, sending shockwaves through the ship. The console screens flickered, alarms blared, and for a brief moment, Alara dared to believe they might actually have a chance. But then the darkness outside the ship deepened, and the Voidbringer responded, its power surging, a relentless, crushing force that slammed against them like a tidal wave. The ship was violently thrown off course, spiraling into the gravitational chaos of the anomaly. The view from the bridge warped, stars bending and twisting, as though the very fabric of space was being torn apart. The hull groaned under the strain, but Ilara refused to relent. They had come too far to back down now. "Keep firing," Ilara shouted. "We need to hit it again now." Rylan's hands flew over the control panel, firing more energy blasts into the swirling mass of darkness. Each shot seemed to do little more than aggravate the anomaly, the energy waves reverberating with the Voidbringer's presence. It wasn't just a physical attack. They were facing an entity that existed beyond the boundaries of their understanding, one that had no form but only will, a force of annihilation that could tear apart the very laws of physics. "Captain," Rylan called out, his voice shaking with dread, It's adapting. Every time we fire, it grows stronger. We're not doing enough to slow it down." Alara's pulse quickened. She could feel the pressure mounting as the Voidbringer's presence pressed in on them from all sides. The walls of the Orion were beginning to warp, the air thick with the weight of an impending collapse. The anomaly was responding to their every move, feeding on their attempts to fight back, growing more powerful with each passing second. She slammed her fist onto the console. "We're not giving up. Rylan, is there any way to amplify our firepower? Anything we can do to push through this?" Rylan's eyes widened as he scanned the readouts, his face pale with strain. I might be able to channel the energy through the ship's core. If we overload the main reactor, we can release a concentrated burst of energy strong enough to disrupt the anomaly, at least long enough for us to escape. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The idea was desperate, but it was their only shot. They didn't have the luxury of time, and if they stayed any longer, they would be torn apart by the Voidbringer's power. The Orion was already on the brink of collapse, and pushing the reactor to overload was a dangerous gamble. But what choice did they have? "Do it," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Make it happen." Rylan nodded, his hands moving swiftly over the controls. The hum of the ship's reactor grew louder, and Alara could feel the ship vibrating under the strain. The whole vessel was on the edge of destruction, but they were committed now. There was no turning back. "Initiating overload," Rylan said, his voice tense. "Brace yourselves. This is going to get intense." The Orion shuddered violently, and the lights flickered out completely. The emergency lights flashed in rhythm with the pulsing energy building within the ship's core. Alara gritted her teeth, her fingers gripping the armrests of her chair as the ship's systems groaned under the pressure. Outside, the Voidbringer was closing in, its shadow stretching further, tendrils of darkness lashing out toward them. The space around them bent and rippled, reality itself distorting under the weight of the entity's power. It was as though the very fabric of existence was being pulled taut, ready to snap at any moment. "All systems are reaching critical mass," Rylan called out, his voice tinged with urgency. "We have one shot at this. If we don't make it count, we're done." The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of the decision pressing down on Alara's shoulders. They were about to make a choice that would either destroy them or give them a slim chance at survival. The crew was ready to sacrifice everything, to fight for the future they still believed in, even in the face of utter annihilation. "Fire the burst," Alara commanded, her voice unwavering. "Now." With a deafening roar, the ship's reactor exploded in a surge of concentrated energy, blasting forward in a brilliant wave of light and heat. The Voidbringer recoiled, its shadow faltering as the energy hit it, destabilizing the fabric of the anomaly. The ship lurched violently, the entire vessel shaking as the surge of power ripped through space, striking at the heart of the anomaly itself. For a moment, it seemed as though the universe itself held its breath. The Voidbringer shrieked, a sound that reverberated through the Orion's hull, a shrill, agonizing cry of defiance. The anomaly flickered, its form warping and twisting, before it began to unravel, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. Alara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the void outside the ship collapse in on itself, the stars beginning to return to their rightful positions. The gravitational forces that had torn them apart began to stabilize, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the Orion was free. But the damage had been done. The ship was battered, its systems barely functioning, and the crew was exhausted from the struggle. They had survived, but at what cost? Alara closed her eyes, her breath ragged as she leaned back in her chair. "We did it," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. "We survived." The Voidbringer was gone, the anomaly was collapsing, and they were free. But at that moment, Alara knew that their journey was far from over. Whatever lay beyond this universe would be just as dangerous, just as unknown. But they had proven something. Humanity could face the unimaginable, could survive against forces beyond their control. And they would never stop fighting.